I'm Aiman, and welcome to my first semester at Harvard College. I came to Harvard from a small high school class of just around 70 students. Harvard had almost 30 times that in the class of 2026. And among the many worries I had going into college, I was worried most about fitting in and making friends. I'd watched videos about Harvard and its toxic environment and culture, so I entered through those gates with a lot of anxiousness for what my next 4 years would be like. That anxiousness melted away only seconds into approaching the welcome tent, where a chorus of students were calling to me. At first, I thought it must have been some mistake, but they explained that they were my proctors for the first year arts program. And they had gone to the lengths of memorizing every single incoming student's name in preparation for a pre-orientation program. Their warm welcome made me realize that maybe things wouldn't be so scary after all. And after getting my keys, moving my bags into my room, and settling down, I felt less worried and more excited to start college. There was nothing like that first night of college after you move in, after your family has left, and you're just sitting there in your near-empty dorm room, that realization finally dawning on you. So this is my life now. I mean, I've lived on my own for a while, but now I was going to be living here, in this completely new place, continuously for the next 3 months, and thoughts swirled within my mind. How would I do in college? What kinds of clubs would I join? Would I make a lot of friends? Would I even make friends? Fortunately, drowsiness took over rather quickly, and I fell asleep. The first year arts program flew by rather quickly. I had the opportunity to learn from talented artists through workshops, trips, and masterclasses on all the different threads of art. Creative writing, dance, drama, film, music, studio arts, and theater design. I got to see a whole nother side of Harvard I honestly knew nothing about when I applied, and meet a lot of people who I am still friends with now, 2 years later. At the end of the program, we put together and performed our own production with an original script, music, and story in just 1 week. At the same time, the rest of the freshmen were moving in, some from their own prios, and many straight from home, and the campus was starting to feel a lot more lively. Annenberg opened its doors for the first time that year, and I got to experience the Harry Potter experience that nearly every Harvard student gets when they first step into Annenberg, just with a lot more Tyvek rap in the rafters. There were many events put on to welcome first-year students. There was a first-year social, intercentenary theater, a first-year fling, the lawn on H, a showing of the god-awful movie that caused Harvard to close its gates to anyone who wanted to film a movie there, a night at the Harvard Museum of Natural History, and a showing of Legally Blonde on the steps of Widener Library. On the more official side, they also welcomed us to our yards and our halls, did a few entryway orientation meetings, and hosted an academic fair displaying all the various concentrations, secondaries, and academic resources we had at Harvard. Finally, the entire freshman class gathered in Tercentenary Theater for convocation.
Good afternoon, class of 2026. Woo!
The day after, classes formally started. For some ungodly reason, I decided to try doing Math 55, which is rumored to be the hardest undergraduate intro math class in the country. 2 weeks into the semester, I dropped out, which, looking back, I should have done 2 weeks prior. The math, which was set in group theory, was too hard for me, not right for me, and I did not have an adequate math background to be taking it. So it was a good thing that I dropped it. I definitely think my brothers Hizami and Figri could do it well in it, though. But anyway, After suffering through a grueling Math 55 lecture where I knew absolutely nothing the teacher was talking about, I attended my CS50 lecture, which was a completely different experience. Harvard's CS50 is the famous to Math 55's notorious, and for good reason. David Malin is an incredible presenter, and while an intro computer science class is not the easiest class to teach or learn in, it's well supported by course staff and in its course material. During the 3-hour lecture's break, they even served CS50 cupcakes. My other classes, XPOS 20 and my freshman seminar, were great as well, but I'll talk more about them later. My first few days at Harvard took me to many new and unfamiliar places. After heading to the DAO to get my hearing aids, I went to Lamont Library to study for Math 55, and then I wandered around the upperclassmen houses until I found Leverett House, where I participated in an open a cappella rehearsal. The day after, I went to Friday prayer at Lowell Lecture Hall, and then I headed back to the yard for the Crimson Jam, which had a few fun festivities and activities, including a little train ride around the yard. The day after, CS50 Puzzle Day took me to the SEC, where I teamed up with my friend Jay in a puzzle hunt hosted by the CS50 staff. I did a little exploring on my own as well. A few of my favorite spots were the 10th floor of the Smith Center, the Science Center Math Lounge, the railings overlooking Annenberg, the Dunster Library, and the SEC as a whole. The activities fair came by in full swing, and hundreds of students gathered into Centenary Theater to advertise their clubs to the freshmen. I was blown away by the sheer variety in clubs at Harvard. Of course, we had an arts and crafts club, an outdoor club, model congress, but we also had a student astronomy club, a knitting club, and even an electronic music collective. You'll see in my later videos that I joined a few clubs, but the ones I was really keeping an eye out for were the a cappella groups. Even though I didn't think I was a performer, I came into Harvard knowing that I wanted to try auditioning for a cappella, since it seemed more chill than other performing arts, since you're mainly just singing. And usually you didn't need to know how to dance. And when I came for Visitas, I went to an open rehearsal and karaoke night that really made a strong impression on me. Anyway, that night, I went to the basement of Memorial Hall for a cappella tryouts. I tried out for many a cappella groups, and I didn't get in, but that's okay. Fast forward to a week or two later, I dropped Math 55 for Applied Math 22A, which was the only class that fit on my schedule with what I already had. That class was at the SEC, and for some reason, I decided that 30 minutes prior to the class starting was the best time to try using the Harvard shuttle for the first time. Long story short, I ended up at MIT. I had taken the M2 shuttle instead of the Harvard shuttle, and by the time I realized I was on the wrong bus, I was too far from Harvard to get off and walk to class. So I decided to skip it. So I spent the afternoon walking around MIT and then back to Harvard. I had lots of moments like that at Harvard, where I found myself randomly somewhere and just decided to go with the flow. On a whim, I joined my path to watch my floor mate's women's rugby game, even though I didn't even like sports. And another time, I was walking in the Science Center Plaza, and there was just a farmer's market there, so I decided to stay for a bit and see what vendors were selling. And one night, I joined my roommate to study with his friends in the law school library, which was so amazing to see in person, but also terrifyingly quiet. I even found myself in the graduate school cafeteria on the way to a halakha, which is an Islamic scholarly talk. There was even one afternoon where, on my way to my CS50 section, I passed by the Science Center Plaza tent where they were holding a disability event, which I really wanted to check out. So I just decided to skip out on my section. Nothing says trying things out on a whim like clubs. But in that first semester, there were a few clubs that stood out to me. I joined several clubs' mailing lists, but did not actually go to those clubs' meetings or events. I went to a few of the gaming group's game nights, Hirsch's board game nights, and I even got access to the Holworthy Hall art room through the Arts and Crafts Collective. But aside from that, I didn't do much in terms of student organizations, which I often look back and regret, because I think clubs are one of the most important part of your undergraduate experience, and I wished I'd gotten into them much earlier. But even though I didn't do clubs, I did try to put myself out there, even if just a bit, through going to events. I didn't go to many parties, but the first year social committee hosted many events and activities for first years, like a Build-A-Bear, pumpkin painting, trick-or-treating in the yard, and a Harvard-Yale poster-making night. Oh, and mentioning Harvard-Yale, that was a pretty cool experience. I mean, we lost, but it was still kind of cool to see the school come together in spirit against Yale. Another way I put myself out there was through working. I worked at the Cambridge Queen's Head pub under Annenberg as a cook, or they call it back of house staff. I found out about the job through a friend, and I had already met the manager at the activities fair. And honestly, I just wanted to try it out. I've heard people recommend that you should always work at least one retail or service job in your life, and I figured, hey, this job seems interesting, might as well give it a try. And man, am I glad I did. I near instantly fell in love with working at the pub. The vibes were chill, and the community was great. My coworkers always chatted with me, and my boss was a pleasure to work under. And being in the kitchen was nice because there was always that sense of work being done. There was never a time when there wasn't a task to be done, like washing the dishes, restocking the fridges, mopping the floors, or putting food into the fryer. And I loved being in that kitchen. My shifts were 4 hours long on 1 or 2 evenings of the week from Thursday to Sunday, but sometimes I picked up double shifts from 4 p.m. to midnight because I just really liked working there. Something about the hustle and bustle and regularity of it all was, in a way, comforting to me. By the end of the semester, it got to the point where my boss had to essentially ban me from staying in the kitchen during my in-between shift breaks. My favorite part about being in the kitchen was that we had a speaker that we listened to music on, and I would always sing to the music. My boss noticed that I loved to sing while I was washing the dishes or mopping, and he told me that I should take my talents on stage. We hosted a karaoke night every Friday, and he always encouraged me to take a break from the kitchen to sing a song or two, so I did. Very often. I don't work at the pub anymore. I haven't worked there for nearly 2 years. But I miss working there a lot. I made a lot of memories and learned a lot while I was employed there. Recently, I found out that the Cambridge Queen's Head pub was closing its doors to become an undergraduate-focused space, which I have mixed feelings about, but most of all, it just hurts that one of the places I called home at Harvard, if even just for a bit, is gone. Hopefully, its spirit lives on in whatever plans they have for it in the future. Following my stint at the Queen's Head, I started working at the Agassiz Theater. The story of how I landed that job is actually pretty funny. Back when I did FAP, I told the director that even though I didn't like being on stage, I really liked to help out backstage, behind the scenes. And maybe I'd like working at the theater. It seems he remembered this all the way to the middle of the semester, when I was exercising in the basement of the MAC gym. I was doing leg lifts on the dip station when across the room from me, I spotted our director. An absolute unit of a man, benching something like 300 pounds. Once he finished his set, he noticed me and he racked his barbell and started approaching me. And when you see a mammoth of a man just finish benching something 3 times your weight and start walking towards you, it's hard not to be a little scared or intimidated. But anyway, He walked up to me and said something like, "Oh, Aiman, I remember that you want to work at the theater. Are you still interested?" And from there, it was history. And that's how I started working as a technical assistant, all because I was working out in the gym. And funnily enough, that's the last time I actually worked out at the gym. So I guess you could call it luck that I ended up there. In that first month I worked at the ag, I really only got shop trained and did a bit of cleaning and organizing. I also helped build their wood storage shelves. I'm still working at the ag even 2 years later, so you'll see more from the theater in my future videos, but it's a pretty fun and fulfilling job, and I'm glad that it found me. And while I'm talking about my favorite parts of my first semester, let me tell you about my favorite class I've ever taken at Harvard so far. Natural History Museums and the Anthropocene. Freshman seminars aren't required coursework, but nearly everyone I asked told me to take one because it was worth it. And I've come to share that opinion. I decided to take my freshman seminar on museums because in high school, I often visited the Yale Peabody Museum for an after-school program, and later worked at the museum as an interpreter. And I figured that the seminar was right up my alley, so I added it to my schedule. The class was small, with only 8 students, which made it feel more intimate because discussions felt more like conversations rather than share circles. And the class met in a cozy corner of Harvard, the University Herbaria, which happened to be very close to all of the other museums at Harvard, so we often took trips to the Natural History Museum, the Harvard Peabody Museum, and the Museum of Comparative Zoology to see their collections. We even got to make our own, quote-unquote, collections by taking plant specimens, pressing them, baking them, and then binding them to a folder that we labeled. Kind of like how normal plant specimens are taken in the field. The class itself was about the importance of natural history museums with respect to scientific research and public engagement. We did a lot of readings and discussions, and drew a lot of pictures to foster discussion about museums, and it turns out there is so much to explore about museums. Not just in the way that a museum displays its exhibit, but also in the way that it uses its collections. Museum collections are a huge source of information for scientific research. And one of the main points of the course was that there are a ton of specimens out there in the world held by museums, and that just organizing these collections alone is already a monumental task. But researchers often use museum collections for important observational studies, like studying how the size of the leaves on plants in blooming season can be affected by an area's temperature, which can be affected by climate change, or how mercury concentration in birds can increase because of the fish they eat, which thus demonstrates an increase in mercury concentrations in the ocean. This adds another level of complexity, where now researchers want to be able to access these collections. More importantly, they want to be able to find these collections and work with specimens easily, which is why digitization of collections became the focus of the course towards the end. We did an example research project where we used the locality data from folders of plants found right in the collections of the herbaria to see if we could observe any changes in distribution of specimens over time and location. Another thing we did was that, for a final project, my group even made a digital museum exhibit. But see, I think the best part about the class was the professor. Every day, he brought so much energy to class and to the discussions. Whenever he talked about anything museum related, he always seemed to have so much passion for what he was talking about, and he would always pay attention to what you were saying. He was the kind of educator that you could tell had that spark of life for their research, and wanted to share that with his students, who truly cared about what he was teaching. And he set my expectations for what a professor at Harvard should be like. And because the professor cared, I cared about the class. And I would always try to bring my best to the class. It's kind of funny that I'm concentrating in mechanical engineering, but my favorite class at Harvard had nothing to do with engineering at all. That's just how good it was. I'm glad I took that class. Let's see, is there anything else I forgot? Oh yeah, I also got COVID. That was not fun. You know what? When I tested positive for COVID in November, I did the whole Crimson Clear thing where you have to report your COVID case and it sets you up for isolation meal pickup and notifies others that you have COVID. But in doing this process, I found out that literally no one else in my class had done the same. How did I find this out? Well, once I figured out isolation meal pickups with Annenberg, I went to go pick up my meals in the isolation pickup room, and nearly all of the equipment looked like it hadn't been touched in months. The staff had put out new fruit and condiments, but the water and the yogurt in the fridge seemed to have been frozen to the point where they were bursting. And every time I went to pick up my food for the next few days, there was never containers meant for anyone else. I realized I was probably the first student to use that room in quite a while, which was interesting considering I knew a few people who definitely had COVID around that time. Whatever the case was, I am deeply grateful to the HUD staff who prepared my meals and helped me gain access to the room. The end of the year came and went pretty fast. There was the CS50 hackathon and fair, and of course there were finals, and then I finally departed to return home to Connecticut. Usually I'd have more to say about finals, but I literally just took a math exam, did a paper, and built a website. Final season was actually not particularly memorable. Overall, I had a good first semester. I explored a lot of completely new experiences, like doing FAP, going to social events, and working at the pub. Honestly, I did not make many friends that first semester. I kind of kept to myself. But even though I didn't get out there as much as I wanted to, I made a lot of meaningful memories and set myself up for an even better spring semester. My favorite moment this semester was from one day during alumni weekend. I was playing guitar in the yard, and an alumni from the medical school came up to me and we chatted for a bit. And she told me that she admired that I was just playing guitar by myself out there. And she asked me how I was doing. And I told her how much I was enjoying Harvard so far, and that I felt like I belonged here. And I'll never forget what she said. "I'm glad you said that you felt like you belong, and not that you fit in here." And that made me realize that all my worries about fitting in at Harvard that I had initially had when I came in were nothing to be afraid about. Because even if I didn't, quote unquote, fit in, I found joy and a sense of fulfillment in the time I had at Harvard. I always enjoyed those small interactions. Sometimes it's nice to feel like you're just living life and not being a student. Alright, so that's it for my first semester at Harvard. I hope you enjoyed the video and that you got some insight into what it's like to be a freshman at one of the top colleges in the world. If you're an incoming freshman, I definitely advise you, an incoming freshman, not just to Harvard, but to college in general, I definitely advise you to clear your expectations of what your first semester is going to be like, or what college is going to be like, and just head into it with a sense of curiosity and adventure. Because after all, the experience is all what you make of it. And it's also, I think, important for me to recognize that, or to acknowledge that, my experience is not representative of everyone's experiences, whether it be being a student at Harvard or being, an incoming freshman to a college. It can be super different for you, depending on your personality and what direction you take your studies in. So if you end up in college, or you go to, or you end up in Harvard, you might have a wildly different experience than me. And I guess it's also not representative because I didn't include everything in this video. I tried my best to pick out the most interesting parts from it, but I had a lot of clips to sort through, and I might not have been able to include everything cool in the story, but also I didn't include some of the low points, I guess you might call them, or some of the points that might not be interesting to include in a video. You know what they say? This is the highlight reel, basically. And you should never compare your blooper reel to other people's highlight reels. But I think that's important to say, because this is only a 20-minute video, and I spent 3 months that first semester. But please like, rate, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for my videos on my next few semesters, as I have a few lined up, since at the moment I'm actually going into my junior year. So this is actually 2 years late. But anyway, I'm Aiman, and thanks for watching. I'm signing out. Peace.